Hello, I'm Tanya Farrelly.
And I'm David Butler.
And you're very welcome to the first instalment of Bray Literary Festival's How Is Your Shelf, where we will both be recommending 5 books for you. And we'll be doing these every week from now on. First of all, we're starting off with the members of the committee, and then we'll be also doing episodes with the writers who are participating in this year's Bray Literary Festival. So David, I think we'll start with you. Would you like to tell us how is your shelf?
Okay, well, my shelf is huge, overloaded and toppling, and to narrow it down to 5 books was next to impossible. So just to make it easier on myself, I limited myself to, I was going to do all 21st century books. Then I decided I'd have one from the 20th century. And then I'd vary it a bit, have a bit of poetry, have a bit of short stories, and then try to vary it in a lot of different ways, just to make things simple. So I'll kick off with the book from the last century. It's a terrific, terrific book. It's the only book I ever managed to struggle through in Portuguese, but there you go. And it is, that's backwards, but Blindness by José Saramago. He's a Nobel Prize winner. I was very fortunate. I actually met him over dinner in the Portuguese embassy shortly before he died. And he's a terrific guy, a lifelong communist, brilliant imagination. But this book, Blindness, it's so relevant to our time. It examines what happens to society when it's hit by a plague, in this case, a plague of contagious blindness. Right from the get-go on page 1, there's a guy stopped at traffic lights who's suddenly gone blind. And a guy decides to give him a lift home, drives home in his car, and he's a car thief. And of course, he goes blind. And then suddenly panic begins to take over. And it's a very dim view in a lot of ways, a sort of a Lord of the Flies view of man-eat-man society. But there's a beautiful thread of humanity that runs through it. It's absolutely life-affirming. And I've hardly ever come across such God-smackingly stunning prose as in that book. So I can hugely recommend, if anyone who hasn't read it, José Saramago. He's a Nobel Prize winner. And the novel is Blindness.
Okay.
Over to you, Tanya, for your first.
Okay, thank you very much. So I guess I'll begin with the oldest one as well. So this is The Blood of Others by Simone de Beauvoir. I'm a huge fan of Simone de Beauvoir. And I suppose I read this one when I was in my 20s, and I developed an interest in French existentialism, if that doesn't sound too pretentious. And I was fascinated by the idea that all of the actions that we take affect other people, which is very true. So I think, you know, Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about this, Simone de Beauvoir wrote about this, and I just think that she succeeds extremely well in getting across this philosophical idea in a novel without sounding too preachy about it. So basically what The Blood of Others is about is the protagonist, Jean Blomard. The novel starts with him sitting vigil by the deathbed of his lover, Helene. And it's basically, it was written during the occupation, and Jean Blomard, the character, was part of the resistance movement. And so just to kind of outline how the existential theme goes through it, because he's involved in very dangerous politics, he decides that he doesn't want his partner, Helene, who is also quite political, to get involved as well because of the dangers. So he tells Helene that he's not in love with her, and she's absolutely traumatized at this. She can't believe it. And so he does love her, but he just tells her this so she won't get involved in his politics. And so Helene, as a consequence, she's devastated by this, and she goes out and she gets drunk and she meets a guy in a pub and she has a one-night stand with him and she becomes pregnant. So by attempting not to affect Helene's life, Jean affects it anyway. There's absolutely no way out of it. So that is my first recommendation, The Blood of Others by Simone de Beauvoir.
Okay, second up, I thought I'd go for a little bit of poetry. I have a few collections of poems out there. It's something I've been doing for 20 odd years, well, 40 odd years with 20 that are any good. And there's a huge renaissance of Irish poetry out there at the moment. There's loads of brilliant living poets, and myself and Tanya have hosted several of them during the Staccato, during Bray Literary Festival down the years. I think arguably, and I don't mean to throw like, you know, a cat among pigeons here, but arguably my favorite Irish living poet, it's a big thing to say, arguably, but there's a lot of them out there, is for her absolutely baroque imagination, Eleanor Hooker. And this is one of her books here, sort of magnificent cover as well. A Tug of Blue, it's called. And rather than try to extol why I love her poetry, what I'll do is I'll just read the opening of one of her poems, to give you an idea of the sort of imagination that's going on here. This is a poem entitled A Calling. And the opening stanza goes, "The night is a drowned woman in off the lake to waken me. She is filled with stones and moulded by the weight of fog. She sings me from the nightmare that you have died in a foreign land. I hear you calling." And so it goes on. Eleanor, she works for the lifeboat service on Lough Derg, so she's very familiar with the whole, you know, the geography and topography of the lake, and it informs her imagination an awful lot. And what I love about it is, if you hear Eleanor reading this live, you'll hear that it's based on an actual phone call when her son was abroad in Lebanon and so forth, and an actual fear, but you don't need to know that. Eleanor Hooker's poems absolutely stand on their own. You don't need any biographical sort of crutch to put them up, but I highly recommend Eleanor Hooker, brilliant imagination. Over to you.
Okay. Well, anybody who knows me will know that I absolutely cannot do this without mentioning my favourite writer, who is Ian McEwan. So the McEwan book that I like best is Enduring Love, which may not have gotten quite as much press as some of his others, in fact. It's you could say it's a psychological thriller in many ways, as well as being literary fiction. It's got one of the most stunning openings of any book I've read. It basically begins with a couple who are out in the middle of a field having a picnic, and then the guy looks up and he starts running towards the centre of the field. And it's not clear in the beginning why he's doing this. And as he looks around, he sees 5 other men all converging in the same spot. And they look up and they see a hot air balloon with a man in the basket and a boy hanging from the rope. And of course, there's this awful, tense moment where they're wondering, oh my God, what's going to happen? Is the balloon going to crash? Is the boy going to fall? Are these people going to get killed? What's going to happen? And then, I mean, what the main story is about, it all stems from this ballooning accident. Out of the 5 men, there's a guy called Jed Parry, and he's a young kind of Jesus freak type guy. And later on, the protagonist is walking down the street and he's really traumatized, and he's just trying to put the whole awful accident out of his head. And this guy Jed comes up to him in the street and he says, oh my God, wasn't it awful, the accident? And the guy's kind of saying, yeah, and he just wants to get away from him. And as the story goes on, he bumps into Jed Parry everywhere he goes. And it's interesting because it is a really psychological novel, because sort of he looks out and he sees Jed standing across the street from his apartment, totally freaked out by this. But on the other hand, his wife doesn't ever seem to see Jed. And without giving anything away at all, I'll stop there. And it's just an intriguing page turner from Ian McEwan. David?
Yeah, terrific. You have your 5th book there, do you?
I do.
Okay. So third up, I'm going to look at the short story. And again, in Ireland over the last 20 years, another explosion and renaissance of the short story. And the other thing that I've noticed in Ireland recently is there's an absolute explosion of really talented writers coming out of the West. Well, loosely, if you draw a line from Cork up to Donegal, there's just a terrific number of really, really talented writers. From the Kevin Barrys and Paul Lynch and Tanya McLaughlin, and there's just so many of them, Ian McBride, Donald Ryan, just go on and on. They just keep producing them. So it's very hard for me to pick one particular short story writer, but I decided to settle on Young Skins by Colin Barrett. And again, I'll limit myself to just reading the opening of a story and a couple of comments on it. What I absolutely love about Colin Barrett is his intense focus on language. And it's not smooth language. It's often gnarled language. There's knots in it, and it's deliberately so. But it's never ever lazy, and it's always extremely vivid and highly focused. This is my favorite story by far in Young Skins, called "Stand to Your Skin," and I just read the opening couple of paragraphs really. Bat is hungover. Bat is late. At the rear of the Maxwell service station, he heels the kickstand of his Honda 150 and lets the cycle's chrome blue body slant beneath him until its weight is taken by the stand. Pat dismounts, pries off his helmet. Black tinted visor, luminescent yellow Cobra decal hastens the dome, and a scuzzy cascade of dark hair plummets free to his ass. Pat makes for the station's restroom. The restroom is little bigger than a public telephone box. Its windowless confines contain a tiny sink and cracked mirror, a naked bulb, and lidless shitter operated by a fitfully responsive flush handle. There's not a single sheaf of bog roll anywhere. A big brown daddy longlegs pedals airily in the sink basin. Pat watches the creature describe a flustered circle, trapped. He could Pam spat the thing out of existence, but with a mindful sweep of his hand, instead sends it unscathed over the rim. And it's those sort of details that I love. Daddy Longlegs pedals airily in the sink basin, and describing a flustered circle. And there's no arrow pointing, look, this is a symbol, this is an image, it's just there. But we do get a sense of the sort of the confine and the trapped nature of Pat's whole existence. A brilliant story, an excellent collection, and I can't wait for the novel. Okay?
It is lovely use of language as well, just using that verb pedals to say what the Daddy Longlegs is doing. That's really great. Okay, well, David went Irish, so I'm going to go Irish for my next one as well. It's actually the only Irish one that I've got here. These are not my top 5 books. I mean, we talked about this and we were thinking, will we kind of go with our 5 favorites, or will we go maybe with some books that people may not necessarily have heard of? Or, you know, we tried to get as an eclectic collection together as we could. So now to my favorite Irish writer, who is Emma Donoghue. And I know kind of when you mention Emma Donoghue these days, everybody thinks Room. And I love all of Emma Donoghue's books. And strangely enough, Room is probably my least favourite out of them, even though it is, of course, fantastic. But I love her historical fiction. But this one is actually not historical either. It's contemporary. And it's called Hood. And you can see it's actually well read and well battered at this stage. And it's a beautiful, beautiful story about 2 girls called Pen and Cara. They're in a relationship. They are lovers. And without, again, giving anything away, because this is on the blurb, this is what happens at the very beginning of the book. Cara dies in a car crash. And so Pen is left completely bereft. She's a grieving widow. But Pen has not come out as gay. Her family have absolutely no idea that she's gay. She knows that they wouldn't approve. And so for the world, you know, they don't see the huge impact that Cara's death has had on Pen. They see it as, oh, she's lost a friend, she's lost her flatmate, but they don't realize that what she's actually lost is her soulmate. And it's really gut-wrenching, the way it comes across. You know, we see her, we hear her internal thoughts, we know that she's this grieving widow trying to come to terms with her partner's death. And I'll actually just read a small piece as well, just a little extract from this one. So it goes between past and present. So, you know, this part that I'm going to read, she's at the funeral, but we have lots and lots of flashbacks to Pen and Cara's relationship, which is very intense and tumultuous. So here she's at the funeral. As we neared the coffin, Kate walking at, but not on, her father's elbow, myself a few feet behind, I thanked the Lord that the top had not been left off. Here was nothing to wrench at the eyes. Rich red-brown wood, and beyond the massed flowers. A tiny plaque, just as I had ordered, with the vital statistics. Cara Wall, 1963 to 1992. Such a tiny span of years. From mini-skirts through to the revival of flared trousers. From Kennedy to Clinton. I looked away, scanning the crowd for a familiar face. Like a theatre audience at a doom-laden preview, the mourners were sitting as far from each other as possible. Elderly neighbours were sprinkled in the back aisles, and the black jackets near the front had to be relations, because some of them were nodding soberly to Mr. Wall as he led us into the third pew. When these people looked at me, they could have no idea that I was anything to their missing relative, that I had let her dip her biscuits in my tea, on and off, for 13 years. That sometimes, in the middle of a conversation on inflation or groceries, she would look down at my hand in sudden wonder and would tell me, her voice hushed as if in church, "Oh, I want your hand inside me." So that's Hood by Emma Donoghue.
Okay, next up, I thought I'd better go across the pond, see what's happening in America. And I was really difficult for me to make up my mind between two of my favorite authors are Laurie Moore, who's absolutely tremendous because she's socially strong and it hits you, but it's very humorous as well, and Elizabeth Strout. And I fixed on this one, Olive Kitteridge, which again, I would heavily recommend. It tackles something that's very unusual in literature, which is the older misanthropic woman. That's what Olive Kitteridge is. She's a curmudgeon, and she's, in her 50s or 60s, and she's not particularly likable. What's very fascinating about this book is it's a whole series of, for want of a better word, chapters. They're really episodes, some of which feature her and some of which barely do. It's almost like a collection of stories about place in which she occasionally features, sometimes as the main actor. To an extent, it's a bit like Winesburg, Ohio, or even something like Dubliners. It's that sort of collection. But it's a fascinating book. It's got a real dark, dry humor running through it. Haven't got around to reading the sequel of it yet, where Olive reappears, so that'll have to be on my colossal TBR list. But heavily recommend Olive Kitteridge. It's funny as well.
Okay, so the next one I'm going to recommend is by a terrific writer called Alice Hoffman, and it's The Ice Queen. So Alice writes a lot of the time what could be described as fairy tales for adults. She's always got this magical element to her stories and to her books. So The Ice Queen really stood out for me because the story is so unusual. It's basically about a girl who makes wishes that she definitely shouldn't make, and they happen. And so there's two major things that she wishes. One, the first is when she's 8 years old, she's having a bit of a tantrum, and it's just herself, her brother, and her mum. The dad left them a long time before. And so the mum is going on a night out with some of her friends, and the 8-year-old girl throws a tantrum, and she basically says to her mother, I wish I never had to see you again. I wish you'd just disappear. And her mother, to echo the previous book, in fact, that was totally not planned, her mother is killed in a car crash. It's a very bad winter. And so she is, this has a huge effect on the girl, and she feels, as a child would, that this is her wish coming through, that she's never going to see her mother again. And then later, as an adult, she makes another very odd spur of the moment wish. She's not feeling good, and she's moved to a new city, and she says, I wish I was, I wish I got hit by lightning. And oddly enough, she does. So I'm going to read a little extract from this. It's the moment when it happens, when she's struck by lightning. So in the evenings, I listened to the radio and busied myself with killing flies, using a fly swatter I bought at Acres hardware store. A bit of death at home. Something I understood. Something I was good at. I'd killed hundreds of flies in no time. I kept piles of bodies on the windowsill. That's what I was doing when it happened. I was holding the fly swatter when I saw something that appeared to be a tennis ball right in front of me. The window was open. The ceiling fan was on. The sky was heavy with heat. I thought perhaps some neighbourhood kids had thrown the ball through my window. I didn't care for children of any age or size. I knew how they thought and what they were capable of. I was about to shout out for the culprits to get off my lawn, but then I saw that the ball was oddly bright, so shimmery I had to squint. When my gaze shifted, I noticed that the fly swatter I was holding was edged in fire, and that the fire was dripping down onto the floor like a sparkler on the 4th of July. I was paralysed, I think, helpless to do anything but watch as the ball fell to the floor. I heard a huge noise, an explosion of some sort, like a shotgun. I thought of the ice that had ricocheted off the roof when my mother drove away. Death sound, the thud of what cannot be stopped. For a second, I thought, it's the end of the world. My world, I meant. In a way, this was true. In a matter of seconds, everything changed. If I had turned left instead of right, perhaps it wouldn't have happened. If the fly I'd swatted had never come in through a hole in the screen, if I'd never left New Jersey, if a butterfly in South America had never unfurled its wings and with a single beat altered everything now and forevermore. So I think you will agree that that's quite a striking extract. And it's a most unusual story. Her brother is a researcher, and he ends up finding out about this self-help group. I don't know if self-help group would be the right term for it, but something similar, where survivors of lightning strikes meet up and talk about their experiences. And when she's at one of these meetings, she hears about this guy called Lazarus Jones, who's been struck by lightning several times, and she's fascinated by this man. And so she goes off to find him. So that's The Ice Queen by Alice Hoffman.
Okay. And finally, I thought I'd include something that came out pretty much during lockdown. And there's plenty of novels that did. There's a few that I loved. I loved Deirdre Grievous, the Ghost in the Throat, about Queen of Artillery. It's terrific. Anne Enright's actress is superb. And I'm going to actually return west to the Shannon yet again for another story about an actress. This is Alan McMonagall's Laura Cassidy's Walk of Fame, which is terrific. It was actually launched the day we went into lockdown. How lucky is that in August Midges? But it really is a terrific read. What Alan McMonagall is extremely good at is almost wrong footing you. You're there in a very kind of light, wonderful, enjoyable prose, all about this, for want of a better word, a drama queen who's got big ideas about herself and about film noir back in the day, and imagines herself in all these roles. And she's going to go for this role in Galway it's the Streetcar Named Desire is going to be put on, and she fancies herself as Blanche Dubois and so forth. And it's extremely funny following her around like that. There is a sort of an undercurrent to it that you're aware of. And what Alan Mack is brilliant at doing is suddenly ambushing you and hitting you when you're least expecting it. Not going for the sentimental, but going for the, oh, ouch. And it's almost dangerous to read at times, but it's brilliantly pulled off. So another recommendation, Laura Cassidy's Walk of Fame. Allow Alan Mack to entertain you.
I'm looking forward to that one. Okay, so my final choice for this evening, it is definitely one of my top 5 books, I think, and it's The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood, the wonderful Margaret Atwood. Myself and David, apart from being writers, we both teach creative writing, and one of the things I'm sure that every facilitator looks at is, excellent openings that just grab the reader by the scruff of the neck and pull them into the story. And so this is one that I always use for an example of just a fantastic opening. So I'm going to read that opening. I'm going to indulge myself here and read it for you. And you'll see what I mean by all the questions that this opening raises. Even the opening line is just astounding. 10 days after the war ended, my sister Laura drove a car off a bridge. The bridge was being repaired. She went right through the danger sign. The car fell 100 feet into the ravine, smashing through the treetops feathery with new leaves, then burst into flames and rolled down into the shallow creek at the bottom. Chunks of the bridge fell on top of it. Nothing much was left of her but charred smithereens. I was informed of the accident by a policeman. The car was mine, and they had traced the licence. His tone was respectful. No doubt he recognised Richard's name. He said the tyres may have caught on a streetcar track or the brakes may have failed. But he also felt bound to inform me that 2 witnesses, a retired lawyer and a bank teller, dependable people, had claimed to have seen the whole thing. They'd said Laura had turned the car sharply and deliberately and had plunged off the bridge with no more fuss than stepping off a curb. They'd noticed her hands on the wheel because of the white gloves she'd been wearing. It wasn't the brakes, I thought. She had her reasons. Not that they were ever the same as anybody else's reasons. She was completely ruthless in that way. I'll stop there, although I would love to go on, and I would heavily urge you to read Margaret Atwood's The Blind Assassin. The title's interesting as well, and probably a lot of you who have read Margaret Atwood will know that she writes quite a lot of dystopian fiction too. And so the format of this book is very interesting because in between the chapters, there's another story happening. And what happens is the sister, Iris, she finds copybooks in the drawers of her dressing table. And Laura has left them there for her to find. And so she starts reading in these copybooks a novel that Laura was writing. And it's that novel that's actually called The Blind Assassin. So you've actually got this dystopian novel in between the story of these sisters and their lives. So yes, so that's Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. So I'd just like to thank everybody very much for watching this session today. Like I say, they will be weekly sessions and you can tune in next week. We will be joined by Brian Kirk and Nessa O'Mahony, 2 wonderful writers and committee members giving their 5 recommendations each. So thank you very much for watching.